This week on Behind the Lens, I'm joined by Alex Mustard. Alex is arguably Britain's most successful and well-known underwater photographer. Over the years, he's won a slew of awards, from appearing in 10 different Wildlife Photographer of the Year books, 4 category winners in British Wildlife Photography Awards, and the overall winner of the GDT European Wildlife Photographer of the Year in 2013. A regular contributor to many dive magazines, he also has a PhD in marine biology, runs workshops abroad, and several book titles. In 2018, he was made an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours in recognition of his achievements as an underwater photographer. We put the question to Alex: what are your 3 most memorable images?
Thanks for joining me today, Alex.
No, you're very welcome.
Obviously, we've tried to whittle down 3 of your most memorable images, which I imagine for you is quite difficult. But let's start with the first one. So what makes this first image so memorable for you?
I think because of the experience. I travelled to California to photograph kelp forests for my book, Secrets of the Seas. We had a whole chapter on kelp, and it was a big thing to go and shoot giant kelp. And then on our first day there, the guys we were going out with said, well, the conditions are amazing. We should go and see this rig because it's not normally as good as this. And I was like, but I've come all this way to shoot kelp. I didn't really want to go and shoot the rig. And then when we got underwater, I realised why. First of all, it was really exciting to be able to dive on an oil rig, simply because it's not normally an environment you get to visit. And so to see what one looks like underwater, to get a feel for how marine life uses it. And then once we got there, it was this incredible oasis in the sea. I think it's you kind of expect an oil rig to be all about sort of doom and gloom and the environmental impact of it. And I think one thing that really drew me into this was, although the oil rig does have negative impacts on the marine life, it also provided a sanctuary from fishing. And fishing does so much, takes so much life out of the oceans. So once you got there, you found this incredible oasis of life, which was protected from fishing because the nets can't fish around the oil rig. And so here you had this sort of microcosm of what the Californian food chain would have been like, before there was fishing. And there's just incredible richness of fish. The thing that really attracted me was the cormorants that were there. They were diving down and trying to catch these Pacific chub mackerel. And so the aim of this shot was to tell that story, but also have the oil rig as part of it. And so I actually used a new lens that I'd been experimenting with at the time for the shot, which allowed me to shoot high quality images with a rectilinear lens, a non-fisheye lens underwater, which is not always the easiest thing to do because it's very hard to get good corner performance when you use a rectilinear lens underwater. But this new optical system that I had allowed me to do that. So it was very much, that made a big difference to the quality of shot.
So were the cormorants, were they the intended target, or was it sort of a happy accident while you were there?
So this was actually taken. So that was the first dive. Was very much a surprise about seeing everything.
Right. Okay.
And then I went back with a different lens, and on subsequent days. And once I'd seen this place, I wanted to go back again and again. So I went back, having shot it a few times with my normal fisheye, and found that the bendiness that it produced of the, for nature subject, it doesn't matter the bendiness of the fisheye, but with the legs of the oil rig being such an important part of the story for me, I wanted them straight, so I switched over to this lens. Here, I'll show you. Yeah. So this is the optical system I was using. It's actually an underwater corrector lens made in the 1970s by Carl Zeiss, and I got given it. It's like a kilo of glass. It must cost a fortune to make. And I've adapted it and then tested it to work on a modern SLR. So I'm the only person in the world using this lens system.
Wow.
And it just gives me an advantage to be able to shoot with those wider rectilinear lenses and shoot them with a more open aperture than other people, which when you're diving in a deep dark deep dark rig is really makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And it's a really nice little system to shoot with. So this is what I was shooting with on that dive. And I would say that quite a lot of my photography is driven by a want to break down those barriers. And I think that's why these 3 shots are so memorable to me, because they're all ones that involve technical breaking down of barriers. And I think as a photographer, you're always... And it's not something... I'm not motivated by sort of trying to get one up on my peers or win a competition. It's very much about getting one up on what I've been able to do myself in the past, or what I feel the status quo is in terms of that type of imagery. And so whenever there's a chance to make use of new technology, whether that's camera technology, lens technology, lighting technology, optical technologies in terms of underwater photography. I'm always very keen to be involved in that. So I went to California with my longtime friend Peter Rowlands, who these days predominantly shoots video. And he actually shot this video of me during the moments I think I was taking this photo. And it was actually more beautiful as an experience than I could capture in a still photo. Although this picture is awarded in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, you know, so photography, you sort of see that as a very much an Everest. Actually, I always think Peter's video footage looks much better than my still photo because it captures that feeling of being there, and it gives you an idea of sort of what's involved as a photographer, the big camera rig I'm pushing around. It was a cold water dive, so I'm wearing a big thick dry suit and everything else. And it was quite an intimidating place to dive because the open ocean in the Pacific is, you know, there's waves and swell and current. And inside the oil rig legs, you had a reasonable amount of shelter from the current. But you were never completely sheltered because they're just legs sticking down into the ocean. And, you know, we were quite concerned about being washed off the oil rig and then out into the ocean and the boat not seeing you before it could pick you up and everything.
Understandably would worry you a bit, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so it was quite an intimidating dive. So that's one of the reasons it was nice to have a dive buddy as well to make sure we were close together.
Yeah. So your second image is a UK one as opposed to abroad. So what made this one stand out to you?
Well, I definitely wanted to choose a UK one because this is a UK series. But I also thought this was a fun one to choose, an interesting one to choose, because it's a picture that is a digital composite of 2 frames. And it's one that I've always captioned that way. I've always been very honest about that. And I think this is an interesting area for nature photographers because ethics across the board are really important. But we also need to be aware of what's possible with modern technology. And this is a picture that I feel that, you know, with endless field time and everything else, I could probably eventually get a shot like this in one shot. But actually, on the particular shoot that I was working on, there was only so much field time. I don't have unlimited budget. And I had this picture in mind, and the whole picture was taken on one day. I was actually diving that day with one of the judges from the Wildlife Photographer of the Year that year, and he said to me, oh, you know, if he ever wanted anyone to vouch for the authenticity of what I was doing, he'd very much say, I'm not trying to misrepresent the subject or anything like that. They were both halves of the frame were taken with the same lens on the same day, everything the same. They just, when we were by the castle, there were no sharks when the sun was out, and then when the sun was out, which I needed for the photo, the sharks had moved elsewhere. Yeah. So it was, and it allowed that picture to come together. But actually, it's not an easy picture to repeat now because you don't tend to see many basking sharks down in Cornwall. I think they've generally moved further north, perhaps with climate change or just changes in the plankton distributions.
I lived down there for 3 years and I didn't see one of the bugs.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think, you know, sort of through the 80s into the 90s, you could see them pretty reliably, and now it's really quite tough. That said, although it is a manipulated image, and I said it's always captioned like that, not every publication chooses to use that caption. It's a picture that commercially is very successful. It's and just as an example, it's quite an interesting one, is BBC Wildlife magazine have run this picture twice, and on neither occasion have they mentioned it was a composite, which I'm relatively relaxed about. I've done my duty as a photographer. They've bought it. The embedded caption that they've worked from, it says the first 2 words of that are digital composite of 3 words. You know, so it's very clear, and I make it all very clear in the labeling of the image. But it's interesting. Sometimes the magazines tell that story. Sometimes they don't. When it's a photographic magazine, then it's much easier to work that story in. But that said, although it's a digital composite, it was also only possible, this picture, because of making some special equipment to make it. And I wanted to show you this. This is...
it's a beast, isn't it?
Look at the huge dome port that I built for my camera to take this picture. Basking sharks feed near the surface, so it's quite an obvious... And they often feed very close inshore. So it's quite an obvious idea to want to do an above and below water picture of one. But the challenge is that the problem is that the sea is very rarely calm around Cornwall. And so it's very hard in the open sea to shoot a split level image. In calmer protected bays or, you know, rock pools and things, it's relatively easy. And the only way I was going to be able to shoot an above and below picture was to make just to have a much larger dome port. So I found this Perspex dome online and got a friend of mine, Peter Liddell, to build this backplate for it so that I could mount it on my camera. and it needs about 2.5 kilos of lead attached to the bottom, which then sinks it to halfway because all the air is very buoyant.
Yeah,
It's a beast of a thing to
Yeah,
move in
it
the water.
is.
And it overheats and it steams up in the sun, and it's really difficult to use in cold water. But I've used it a lot with the basking sharks and a lot with grey seals. I've had awarded pictures with it in BWPA, twice I think taken with it. So it's been very effective.
As an underwater photographer myself, one of the first things I think is how the hell do you keep all the water droplets off the top of a dome that big?
Well, the good thing is actually because it's quite big,
Yeah.
the water doesn't get up too high on it, so it only
Okay.
goes up about this far. But yeah, I
Right.
just tend to just dip it down, and it's actually very nice to swim with in the open water because you just put it in the water and your camera just sits there next to you
Yeah.
halfway along, and I've actually shot video through it. And although I used this a long time ago, the BBC for Blue Planet were very sort of inspired by this, and they used big domes like this a
Yeah.
lot during Blue Planet. It became one of the signature things, obviously in more recent years from when I took this shot back in the D300 days.
So this dome influenced Blue
I'm
Planet.
not sure it influenced that. I think we all influence each other. I certainly watch those shows and get a huge amount of thing. But no, I think the use of the big dome, I think, was something that visually they felt was something fresh they could bring visually.
Yeah, it worked really well.
And particularly on video, actually, I think more so than on stills. I think it looks really, really interesting the way the water laps. And I see that when I look through my camera, but don't tend to shoot video very much with it.
Yeah. I know with topside photography, you'd almost get lynched for composite. So I seem to think that, I don't know if you agree with this, Alex, but underwater photography seems to be a little bit more forgiving and progressive with technological adjustments on the camera, whether it's in Photoshop or whatever. It seems to be not, as long as you're honest, it doesn't seem to be as big a problem.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult area, and we could talk for a lot more than 10 minutes about this. But I think the most important thing is always to be honest and open about what you're doing. That way, if people don't like what you're doing, at least you've been honest. You're not trying to hide it from anyone. I did have a lot of concerns with this image before making it available, is whether I should, because you're almost opening that Pandora's box, and then everyone starts to question everything you do. But I feel that I've had enough of a track record in competitions like wildlife photography, like British Wildlife Photography Awards, like the GDT competition, which are very strict on raw file checking, that people know that my work isn't normally done that way, and I think this is okay as an exception. But I could equally understand a photographer not wanting to ever break from that code, however honest they're being about it. But it's why whenever I talk or about this picture, I'll always make the point of saying it's a composite, and I often actually put a little C next to it when I show it as in a talk or something, and I'll say at the beginning of the talk, there's 1 or 2 pictures in this picture that I digitally manipulated, and I've marked them with a small C, so when they're on screen, you know. But the flip side of that is, as a working professional, this picture sells. And I think as long as I'm okay with it, certainly my picture agents, Nature Picture Library, they're perfectly happy with that as long as it's correctly labelled. Then I say go for it. But it was something that I had this vision for this shot and was able to create it this way. But it's not something I set out to do all the time. So I remain mixed, and this was the shot, I think, is 2009, 2010. So, and I've not gone and done lots more shots like this in the future. So I'm not quite sure where I sit with it. But I certainly think it's an interesting area for photographers.
We've both got sausage dogs now, coincidentally.
Yeah.
This third image, what made this one stand out to you?
I like this picture because it was taken snorkeling, it was taken in fresh water, and I think people often feel that underwater photography is this different genre that people can't get involved in because they have to know to dive, they have to buy this expensive equipment. And yes, I did take this picture with expensive equipment, but I think the opportunity is one that would be available to everyone. And I know you're a massive fan of freshwater photography, much more so than me. And I thought, it's also a picture a little bit for you, I guess.
No, you shouldn't have.
Yeah, but I think it's important to encourage people that underwater photography, you don't need to be a scuba diver to do it. You don't need to travel all around the world to do it. Although this picture is an overseas picture, there is opportunities wherever you can get a camera wet. And even, I know you've done it, and I've done it occasionally, of taking underwater pictures without even being in the water myself.
Well, this year I've not been diving once this year, but I've done quite a lot of underwater, so you can, it is doable.
Yeah. This one's a big fan of diving. She's a big underwater swimmer. Anyway, yeah. So this picture here was taken on a family holiday in Florida back in February, and it's a new picture from this year, and also taken with a brand new lens system. One of the problems with underwater photography is in wide-angle photography is land lenses are designed to work in air, and we have to take pictures in water, and that causes a lot of issues. And slowly now, there's more solutions available that allow you to take better quality pictures underwater with underwater designed lenses. And this was using a new one made by Nauticam, which is an excellent underwater lens, and it opens a lot of new possibilities for photographers. And so that side of it is quite interesting. But also, I was really fascinated about shooting these freshwater turtles in Florida, because I've spent a lot of time shooting marine turtles. They're one of my favourite subjects. I've shot marine turtles all around the world. And I just kind of thought, oh, freshwater turtles will be more of the same. And they're really different. The first thing is, marine turtles are generally very accepting of you as a diver. You can swim up to them, they just get on with their own business, as long as you don't, as long as you show some sense in approaching them and you don't harass them, they'll just carry on with their life, and you can take some pictures and just chill out. And turtles kind of live on a slower pace, so you just chill out down to their pace, and they're nice and easy to interact with. But freshwater turtles, they're manic things. They're very, very skittish. As soon as they see you, they're off. So it becomes a really interesting wildlife challenge to get close to these. And actually, the key was to find the right location, as with many things. And in this area here, we actually visited a place that's a very popular swimming freshwater spring. And there's a few turtles living in there, but because they're used to people going in there swimming, they didn't scatter at the first sign of a person. And we were able to get relatively close encounters with them, because obviously as an underwater photographer, this isn't close. You'd be too far away for me to shoot normally. So you really need to be able to get in that close to them. And so finally I found the right turtle and was able to produce the shots I wanted. And I particularly like this shot. It was taken in the winter in Florida, so the trees haven't got any leaves on. You kind of got this very monochromatic frame, dark water in the spring, and then the colours of the turtle really stand out against it. And something that I like in the picture is a very small detail most people wouldn't notice, is marine turtles swim generally with a symmetrical beating of their flippers, whereas freshwater turtles generally swim like a running animal, like this. Duk, 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 duk. Okay. So I like the fact that its flippers are sort of uneven, because it's very much they're very different in the water, even though they look the same. And so yeah, I was really happy to be able to get this shot.
Thanks for watching, and why not check out our other interviews here? Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to keep up to date with the latest content. Until next time, cheers.